Call the meeting to order. Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk call roll, please?
Counselor Bolin?
Here.
Counselor Elliott?
Here.
Counselor Fisher?
Here.
Counselor Grizzle?
Here.
Counselor Reeskamp?
Here.
And Counselor Scott?
Here.
Okay, thank you, Linda. We have the consent calendar, the agenda for today's meeting. Are there any corrections or additions?
I would move for approval. Second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Consent calendar passes. We have an opportunity for the public to make comments. The City Council welcomes all respectful comments regarding city's business. Citizens may address the council by approaching the microphone, signing in, stating their name and address for the record. Each citizen is provided up to 5 minutes to provide comments to the council. Council may take an additional 2 minutes to respond. The city clerk will accept and distribute written comments at a speaker's request. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the regular session. Number 1, budget status report. Dean Baugh, Finance Manager.
Okay, so this says that I'm giving a status report. What we've done is over the last day or so, Walt and I have got together, and he has a whole presentation here, which includes the numbers and the items. So I'm going to turn over to Walt for his presentation. We'll be available for questions after we're done with this.
Okay, thank you.
Well, all set?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As the title shows, we're here to discuss the current budget, and I want to emphasize I'm going to be talking about the general fund budget. Before I get started, I'd like to let you know that water, sewer, urban renewal district, building funds are all solid. We're doing very well this year. But we do have a bit of an issue with regard to our general fund. One of my first things I did when coming on as interim was to sit down with Dean and look at the issue of what is our end-of-year analysis. In other words, will we have enough money to pay the bills and finish up this budget year? Unfortunately, we found ourselves in roughly about a $400,000 hole for this fiscal year. This is a result of less carry forward due to a change in some accounting practices that totaled about $120,000. There's about $140,000. There's about $120,000 reduction in terms of fines and forfeitures that we anticipate coming in. But the biggest change was that we've had a reduction from our anticipated revenue from property taxes. That accounted for nearly $500,000. Now, it's not unusual at this time of year to find ourselves that we have a bit of a discrepancy between what we anticipate coming in, what we actually have coming in our expenses, and usually the last 4 or 5 months of the fiscal year are spent closing that gap. However, this was a significant gap. I don't recall one, at least in my memory, of this magnitude, and it took a lot of work to reduce that. I have to give right now tremendous credit to the department managers for going through their budgets, literally item by item, $10 here, 50, 100,000, whatever it took to do it, and finally whittled that deficit down to $225,000. There was a lot of work involved with that, a lot of lost sleep on that one, and a lot of wrestling just to kind of get that thing down there. I want to emphasize that at this juncture, we're about, again, $225,000 in the hole for fiscal year 2013, 2014 in our general fund. Everything else is fine. This is not an issue of expenditures, it's an issue of revenue. Revenue simply fell far short of expectations this year. We only have one option, and we have to use our cash reserves to cover our deficit. We cannot wind up the year in the hole. We're not a private company. We can't borrow, go out to the commercial market or sell stock or whatever. We have to balance our budget. Currently, our reserve funds total about $675,000. When all is said and done to cover the deficit, we will wind up in some range. Again, some of these numbers are still flexible. We may have other bills coming in. We may have other revenue coming in. but we will wind up with about $425 to possibly up to $450,000 in our reserve fund to begin next year. This will require a budget amendment, and we'll come back, Dean, probably March or April for that, so we can finally clear that up. That was a problem, but the real issue is next year's budget. There's a number of factors that are creating some serious issues with this budget. The first one is that we anticipate revenue being flat. As you're aware, state has a limitation of 3% increase in value. This says even if we get that full 3%, it might only mean another $100,000 in tax revenue. It's not significant. The other thing is that you can go around the city and seeing a lot of buildings being built that have certainly some value. The downside is most of them, if not all of them, are in the urban renewal district, so we're not seeing that as part of our general fund, or they are not owned by nonprofits such as the ODVA site and LBCC, and these are non-taxable properties. So the city is not seeing that revenue come in. We went through a lot of material and service reductions this budget year. We are going to be extending those to next year. In other words, frankly, if your chair breaks, find another one in the building to use. You don't go out and buy anything new. We're really trying to cut things out. The difficulty is that while revenues remain flat and we're cutting wherever we can, certain expenses just keep going up. Utilities will go up, cost of fuel will go up, there are benefit packages that will be likely going up. There will still be a need for equipment and supplies, and those have a general increase. The other thing, and this is probably the most significant change, is that we are changing our accounting practices in the city. We are no longer relying on enterprise or URD funds to pay for some of our general fund salaries and benefits. Let me give you an example. I'm the community development manager. That's my regular daytime job. And I get paid through building fund. I get paid through the planning fund, which is general fund. I also work a lot in the urban renewal district, so I get some of my salaries covered by them, and also sewer and water projects as well. I'm spread out through a number of funds because I do a lot of activities in a variety of funds. There have been in the past and continue to be certain positions that and probably the best thing is just give you an example. We have one particular position that 35% of that position is funded from the Northwest Urban Renewal District. The difficulty in that is that one position probably spends nowhere near 35% of that time in the Northwest Urban Renewal District. So in other words, there is a mismatch. We're not aligning the budgeting with the tasks that are being performed. And we have been informed of this issue before. Interim City Manager John Nelson, my two predecessors, basically said this is a problem. It is something that you need to address as soon as possible, and this cannot be sustained. It's going to catch up to you. And unfortunately, at this point, it is simply catching up to the city of Lebanon. I will also note for the record that Dana Levac was also made aware of this, and he was working with Dean on getting these things corrected, and part of that had to do with some policies and procedures that we fully anticipate bringing before the City Council at some point in the future. So what is our bottom line for the next fiscal year? Our initial take at our 14-15 general fund, again, I want to emphasize this is all general fund, our first look identified a deficit of over $700,000. And that cannot be contracted simply through materials and services. We have done everything in our power to go ahead and reduce our material and services budget. In fact, we're talking about some amazing things in terms of cutting back, in terms of some copiers, some printers, some ways to save money every which way we can. However, this is still a significant gap. Essentially, at this time, we could use all of our expected cash reserves, again, that $450,000 for next year, and still be in the hole. we would be left with a deficit and no cash reserves come June 30th of 2015. So given this situation, we have no option but to cut expenses further. And as labor is our largest component, that quite frankly means staff reductions. So, to bring this to sort of some point, to balance our general fund budget for 2014-15 and maintain at least a cash reserve, we're just hoping at least $400,000 for emergencies. We will need to eliminate the equivalent of 10 full-time equivalent positions. This represents about 1 out of every 9 FTE positions in the city. These layoffs will affect exempt, non-representative part-time employees. They will also affect the union, AFSCME, and Teamsters. And it's also going to affect all departments one way or the other. If they're not cutting staff, they're going to get less money for a variety of projects. Things will be curtailed. It's frankly not going to be fun. Our concern is that we can probably limp through next year as well, making a couple of cuts here and there, a couple of cuts there, but we're going to be right back at this table. Not me, but Gary Marks is going to be back here at this table, and he's going to be going over the same thing with you, that we need to make more cuts. We feel that this is important enough to bring to your attention now. It is a very sobering moment for the city, but these things have to be done. And this is not something we're taking very lightly. Also, there is a certain amount of delay in the processing of going ahead through these reductions in force. It is quite possible if we wait till next fiscal year, we will absorb at least 4 more months of payments that we really can't afford. So it's our recommendation that if you believe that we need to move forward on this, it's appropriate to do that we begin this reduction in force immediately. And we will certainly follow that out. This has been one of the toughest times I've ever had in my 30-plus years as a public servant. We're dealing with people's lives. It's not a fun issue. I don't think I could have made it this far without the help and support of the department managers. We have spent enormous amounts of time, enormous amounts of energy on this. I'm sure they don't say a lot about it, but it's no doubt in my mind they have sleepless nights. And they're just kind of wondering always, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? After looking at this, after mulling over, after seeking wiser counsel than mine, I can just say I think we've done everything we can in our power to make this as least painful as possible, but we are facing the inevitable, and it's something that we have to do. So why am I before you here today? If I were your permanent city manager, I could begin this process. However, as pro tem, I cannot hire, fire, or make other staff movements without city council approval. So essentially, the purpose of this meeting, obviously, is to share information, but if acceptable, direct myself and also the department managers to proceed with whatever changes need to be made to make sure this year's budget and next year's budget fall in line with expectations. And again, I want to take this time to thank, from the bottom of my heart, the hard work that the department managers have done. I really feel that we came together as a team, and we put everything we can in this project. And I can't think of anything more to add, and I'll leave it at that.
Did you have anything to add, Dean?
I think one thing Walt and I talked about was a number of these cuts. When the economy crashed back in 2008, if you looked around Oregon and the country, a lot of places were cutting and doing all that back then. They took these hard hits back then. Lebanon didn't. You know, we've seen some pay raises. We've seen people added. I think this is kind of like, this is our 2008, you know. We've been kind of stealing from Peter to pay Paul with the URDs and all this stuff, and, well, that needs to stop. And so we talked, this is our 2008, you know, we're trying to straighten things out and say, now we need to prepare the city to go forward, and that's what we're trying to do here. You know, and we're looking at, we don't want to do a little bit now and then come back next year and do, you know, as I think when we talked to Gary, it's like, we don't need the what did he call it?
The death of
a thousand cuts.
Cuts, yeah.
You know, it's better just to cut, pull the Band-Aid off, do it once, and just then prepare to go forward, instead of a little bit here, a little bit there, and always coming back and saying, we're supper, we're supper, we're supper. You know, let's just do it, get going, pull the Band-Aid off, and then move on. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. Like Walt said, this has been a tough thing. The director's been meeting every morning, 8 o'clock for a week and a half, 2 weeks now. We've been getting together doing this. This has not been an easy process as we've been through this, but everybody's pitched in and did a good job.
And I just want to let the council know that Gary Marks has been informed of this, and I've been in communications. He also talked with Walton Dean, and he's examined the budget, and I just want to get his opinion on it because he's coming in, and I hate to dump something on his lap. And he was fully in support of what they've come up with, what the staff and management has come up with. He feels that, again, that it's better to make the change now, get it set, and not have to do it again. Even though it's deep and it's not fun for anyone, it's something that needs to be done. But I just want to let you know that he is in support of that, and it's going to be tough for him coming in with that on his lap either way. But and I also want to thank Walt for doing this and the effort that he's put into it, and Dean, and I know all the staff, and I know it's very difficult because this is people's lives, and it's not an easy thing to do, and I appreciate all your hard work, and you know, everybody being a team and giving part of their department up for whatever, for the cause, really. So is there questions of council now of Dean or Walt?
No, I'd just like to say also that I know these are tough times, and I want to thank Walt and all the department heads for the time and energy that they put into doing what has to be done. And you know, it's interesting, the 2008 scenario, because I think it's basically that's what we are, and that we have had, you know, 5 or 6 years where we've done some pretty positive things that others weren't able to do in 2008. So I think there's some celebration to be had over that, but now is the time for us to address that.
Yeah, it looks to me like we haven't got any alternative here, that we've got to get things straight.
I got some questions. And I'm running through a gamut of emotions here, but I found out about this on Tuesday, and I've quite frankly been sick to my stomach since then when I think about this. I'm furious about this. This is not something that I'm happy just rolling over and taking, and I'm certainly not happy in the least bit to see 10 FTEs being given pink slips on Friday or Monday or whenever it's going to happen. 2008 happened in 2008, but where were the steps taken to prepare us for this in 2008? When was this? My question, I guess, is who knew about this and when? Because the responsibility lies with us as a city to foresee this and to predict. I know projections come in short. I get that. I get that taxes, you know, we're dependent on tax revenue. But how do we get 2/3 of the way through our fiscal year before this even comes to the attention of council or of staff, for that matter? I don't fault anything that the department managers have done to this point in their work or what Walt has done. You know, I feel like there should be some more answers here, and I'm not really happy with what I'm hearing currently.
I could provide some response to that. Let's separate this into two separate issues. One is this year's budget, probably a little easier to deal with. We do not get a lot of these numbers until January or February. And when it comes to that, again, this is pretty common that you had got a gap and you got to start closing it. This year, the gap was just phenomenal. And I think there was a little higher expectation for tax revenues to come in. And again, we make a projection. We anticipate this to occur. That defines our budget. That projection was too high. It is evident. A $500,000 difference is significant. Also, the fact that we went through the accounting changes, which reduced our carry forward. And last but not least, there was, I think, a change in legislature that in theory we're supposed to get more on fines and forfeitures. That has simply not come in. Now, we made some additional revenue elsewhere, but it did not compensate for that. So normally about now, I wouldn't have been surprised if we saw a $100,000 deficit. That's something that we could have closed. But when it starts off, in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, that just changes everything dramatically. In the larger picture, as I mentioned, our interim manager, John Nelson, ran through the books. One of the first things he did, and he made it very clear to the department managers that this was a serious issue for the city and they had to start addressing it. He saw it.
I understand where we are in the position we're in now, and I understand that our hands are tied at this point to balance our budget. I think it's an absolute shame that 10 people are going to lose their jobs because of the way previous administration ran things, or because of the way the practices that used to happen. I'm glad to hear that policies are being put in place now to prevent this. I'm glad to hear that we're not doing this anymore. But that to me it's sickening, because those are people behind those jobs. And
I don't think you'll get any argument from the department managers on that.
I don't.
Dean, rough order of magnitude of the city budget, does labor cost account for what, 2/3, 3/4 of the budget as opposed to materials? Is that
Between 50 and 75%.
between 50 and 75, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah.
So roughly 2/3 around the order of magnitude.
We're mostly, if you take contracts out, like the $12 million water plant, or don't take those out to the normal budget, yes. We're mostly a service organization.
Sure. Well, like Jason, you and I don't always agree, but I happen to agree with you today. It is tragic that we're facing this. And Walt, I agree with Jason again. I don't have any quarrel with your work or the work of any of the rest of the staff. In fact, I commend all of you. It is difficult. I would point out, and this is particularly difficult for me, but because it may sound a tiny bit hard-hearted, 2/3 of the dollars we spend, of course, go to people and maintaining people's lives. And that's what's difficult about this kind of budget. Every one of those dollars is taken more or less involuntarily from another citizen. So it's a two-sided coin. We sometimes don't remember that there are two sides to every one of those dollars that we spend here. And we impact people's lives both ways. Clearly, the 10 people are going to take a much bigger personal hit than 15,000 taxpayers. But in concept, everybody is doing this. So the thing I think we need to consider going forward is how we budget and how we operate the organization generally. And this is beyond probably the scope of today's meeting, but I think that it would behoove us to take a really hard look at zero-basing our budgets on a periodic basis, what's truly essential. And then I think we ought to look at our budgets not just simply to balance every year. We ought to be looking forward to additional, a little bit more cushion than average every year, long-term conversation about how we do our budgeting, because to get to this juncture where we take people and lay them aside is really not an okay way to operate. But I think it speaks to some much bigger issues than this simple short-run management decisions and practice. It's a fundamental way of looking at the way what we do and why we do it that I think we need to take a hard look at. So I would suggest that that's something we want to do this year, is truly look at what it means to zero-base our budget, take it clear down to basic essentials. Because one of my first questions is, if we're going to take one of 9 positions, 10% of our workforce, is that what we're talking about?
1 out of 9, yes.
1 out of 9. Those 9 people, I think it's safe to assume we're doing things that were worthwhile. They're not going to be doing those worthwhile things to agree with 1 out of 9 of our... So clearly what we do has to shrink. And my question, again, I want to be not hard-hearted about this, but if we can truly afford to not have them, why do we have them in the first place? And if we can afford to not have these based on our current budget, what else can we afford to not have? and I'm not suggesting I have answers to that, but I think we need to ask those questions in a hard way and really, truly build this from the ground up about once every 4 to 6 years.
I'd like to follow up on that, if I may. One of the key things that both amazed me and I found very supportive is that the managers looked at it in terms of what's our primary function. I mean, that's where a lot of it came. What's our primary function? What's really important for the city? What's really important for us to get the work done for the city? Once those key areas were identified, everything else sort of like, this would be nice to have, but we can't afford it right now. Maybe later, but not right now. So I think that was seen. I guess another item that came up quite often, and it's more a visual than anything else, is it was often commented, where you've always looked at our budgets like this, these changes, we can now see our budgets like this. We've been unable to plan for the future because of the way the budgets have been done. Now we can see how FTEs are going, we can see where it's being, the monies are coming from, and we could actually start planning on a department level.
I would say it is sickening. The whole thing is sickening, most definitely for the 10 people whose lives are going to be impacted most. And I appreciate what department managers have gone through. I think it's been a real, if nothing else, a huge exercise in leadership and teamwork, because this got to be, you mentioned this is the hardest thing you've ever done. I got to imagine that sentiment is shared, and so I would commend you from that level. And Barry, when you were talking about, we had the contingency fund discussion a little bit, a little while back, and sickens me as hard as I fought for contingency fund, and for why you use it. You don't use it because you've, for one reason or another, mismanaged money. It's for absolute, by God, bottom line emergencies, which our hands are forced today, and it becomes an emergency. And so we do what we got to do today. But I keep asking myself, what could I have done different? What could I have seen? What could I have, what should council have questioned is, am I doing my job? And what, when I'm looking at the numbers, what should I have seen? And I don't know. We pay to have our budget, our numbers audited and do fairly well. Is there something I should have paid attention to, I guess, or is this really mostly just a function of, I think, did we really overestimated taxes, and we have some accounting things that's going to fix, so I don't need to worry about that in the future. What do I need to pay attention to keep this from happening again, I guess? What can I do as a counselor?
Well, one, you are on the budget committee.
Yeah.
Automatically. I think what's happened is that at this juncture, I think our budget officer, finance director, is now free to provide a budget based on reality.
Okay.
And I think that is probably the most important step forward. The way we were doing it was not sustainable. What you're going to face in the future is a sustainable budget. This is what we have, this is what we could spend. And these projects are being funded properly, and these people are being funded properly.
Walt, if I could follow up a little bit on both your comments. I sat on your planning commission for a long time. And
I do remember.
And one of the things I really appreciated about what happened on that planning commission was that on a periodic basis, there were various work sessions that basically boiled down to training sessions for the planning commissioners. That there were things that we didn't understand always, and sometimes it was done on a regular basis. This happened, even before you were in this position, but there were these, lack of a better word, training sessions for the folks involved. And to what you're talking about, Rebecca, I think all of us probably could benefit on an ongoing basis from periodic workshops, training sessions on, how the budget system works, just to keep us well in tune with what we need to know.
I just feel ultimately culpable. We're ultimately responsible for the fact that 10 people are losing their jobs. Not only that, but the workload, it will still be there for the people that are left. And that people are going to have to work smarter and harder and or decide which things get done and which things don't get done. And that's ultimately our fault. I just want to, if I could be trained.
It's our decision to make, and we need to be looking at that.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that is that probably, if part of what I'm hearing is that 2 of those people should have probably left 5 years ago, or it was trying to sustain levels possibly that caused part of this. Because if indeed there were money coming, if there was a incorrect perception of 35% of the time coming from a fund, and that was probably not the way to judge it, then we should have made that correction at that time. I hope I'm making sense. So I guess part of what you trust the people that are preparing the budget to some degree. If Walt says that he's coming 35% out of this budget and 10% out of this, I don't know the difference. I trust that that's true. So maybe what we need is part of what we're talking about today is more on a policy level, that we want to be tighter or more prudent in the way that we allocate funds from department to department, so that it makes more sense. Am I clear in what I'm saying?
Well, and correct me if I'm mishearing, but Dean, you feel better this year, more free this year to do things as you would. Do I hear that correctly?
Yes. That's the short answer.
Okay.
And one of the things that's happened is that when John Nelson brought this up, it was passed on to Dana to handle, Dana Levac. And Dana was working with Dean closely, and Dean has several of the policies and procedures that specifically address these types of issues so that this does not happen again.
And we need to underscore that with the new administrator.
Yes. And
that's our desire to continue to.
And he's 100% behind it. And his expertise is budget area, and one of the things he told me is he wants to simplify our budget. He looked at our budget, and he was actually kind of aghast by how it looked. He said, I want to simplify it so that the average person can look at our budget and work with it and understand it, and that's his goal, and I really think that's going to be good.
Yes.
I get a stroke every year when I begin that massive project. But that is then, I think it could be really easy for us to, I don't want to say overreact, because it's difficult to overreact to such a, it's a grave thing we do, but we can't make that let us micromanage either. We have a new city manager coming in who we will need to hold accountable and be very articulate and very clear with him. And it sounds like you have a good start on that, Paul, and I appreciate that. And
one other note that I want to make, and go out there on a limb on this, is that the managers did not previously have power or have any say-so in FTEs.
I hear that.
And I will just say that, and that has changed, and they are fully vested now, and they have control of their budgets, and that's the way it's going to be going forward.
Well, I recall when I was interviewing Gary Marks, that he made the comment that he's going to need to take a real close look at our budget. I don't know whether he'd had some input from John Nelson or not, but I think he was pretty concerned at that time.
Yeah.
What was our delinquency rate this year? Or what is our delinquency rate currently?
On taxes?
Yeah.
We go about 93%.
What was last year?
It's been pretty close to the same. It's like 93 to 95 is where the county collects. They collect really good. And usually we get, if you look in the counties, they send out a notice and it kind of says what their delinquency rates are, but or each area. Ours has been, we've been getting in, like, say, about 93%.
So have we been projecting in line with what county's projections were?
Yeah, usually what I do is I call the county and I kind of, they won't say, here's what to put in. They go, we've told our accounting department to do this. And that's all they'll say. And so we assume back from that.
So my question is, if we're following that line, if we've been following that line since the time of Moses, why this year are we $500,000 short? And if we're $500,000 short, does that mean that the sheriffs, the county?
No, actually, our taxes have come in higher than what they were last year, but the projections was too high. And without going into a lot of detail, I do my projections, and then the budget is balanced, and sometimes numbers are pushed up. This year, they're not going to be. We're doing the other side. We're saying this is what we're going to project. And we're not putting a lot of fluff into the numbers. That was done in the past.
And let me follow up on that. If you look at our budget right now, this year, projections aside, every department is actually under budget. It's just the projections for the revenue are too far out there. So, no, we haven't been spending money frivolously. We've been tied to our budgets. We've been cutting everywhere we can. And again, each department is under their budget.
Except for the city manager's budget. And I have to fix that one.
And that's why we're coming back. Yes.
You know, one of the things that I said here, and I've been wondering since we've known about the deficit, is that we as a council, me as a counselor, we sit here on an annual basis and listen to our audit report, and we get a management letter saying how the audits went. And in my years as a counselor, I have not heard in the last, well, any year, that we are headed in a deficit situation from our auditing firm. And I appreciate that council made a decision to have a different set of eyes, audit this past year, and I know that we got some management suggestions in terms of how we calculate revenue and do certain things that we have authorized to be changed. That has caused us some unpleasant results, and that does affect people's lives, which I seriously don't like at all. And but somewhere we have enough information and enough knowledge to make that correction, and unfortunately, now is the time.
I have to agree with you all the way, Wayne. I'm very sad that we're in the position that we are, but we've got to dig ourselves out of it. And that being the case, I move that this council grant the interim city manager, after consultation with the budget officer and department heads, the authority to make budget cuts, including layoffs, as necessary to balance the budget and in preparation for next year's budget. Any such layoffs shall be done in compliance with all union contracts and in compliance with city policy.
I would second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to give the authority to pro tem city manager Walt Wendlowski and staff to make the appropriate budget cuts, including terminations and per the rules and the laws set out. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion passes.
Can
Could we please have a roll call, because it takes a certain number of supermajority vote? I'd like to
Okay.
have a roll call vote.
Could we have a roll call vote, please, Linda?
Counselor Elliott?
Yes.
Counselor Grizzle?
Yes.
Counselor Bolin?
Yes.
Counselor Reescamp?
Yes.
Counselor Fisher?
Yes.
And Counselor Scott?
Yes.
Thank you, Trey. Okay. Any other items from the council?
Yeah.
Great.
We just voted for this motion, and I fully support it. I'd like to, I'm not sure it's in order of a motion, more consensus. I mentioned that I think there's some value in going forward with some form of formalized training and education for us on budgetary issues, and also some deeper looks at our budgeting process from a council level. Not just something we hand off to say, staff, go do this for us, but to really embed in our own thinking and minds. I'm not prepared to make a specific suggestion as a timeline on this, but is there a consensus? Am I the only person that feels like this would be a really important thing to do, to actually schedule some time and some
I think a work
to
session
really work on
before the budget process would be a
Really get-
helpful thing.
into this a little deeper going forward?
I think if we're going to do it, we should invite the budget committee members also.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Anybody else that wants to be here? I mean,
Absolutely.
You
this
could
is-
certainly schedule it as part of the first meeting of the Budget Committee
Yeah.
and dedicate the first meeting, the first few hours, however you want to do that.
I would say a couple of weeks before we have a budget, or as we get the budget, to walk away from such training, to spend some time then using
time.
that to dissect what we can.
Yes.
But it is a very complicated budget. It's very convoluted. It gives me a headache. It is, yeah, I'm in consensus with some training.
What's the approximate start date of the budget committees?
I believe the Budget Committee is supposed to be around the 14th or 16th of May is when their first meetings are.
Okay.
I will say what a lot of cities do, and I say a number of cities, is before that, they'll have a pre-Budget Committee meeting, not hand you the budget, because it's not ready yet, but go through, here's what the process was to build this. Just kind of not through the numbers, not, kind of what you're talking about, not looking at numbers, not just what was the process to where that, and then they get the budget delivered to them, and then we go into the budget meetings. So we could set up something like that.
think
It's
that
kind of a
would be good.
training saying, here's what we did to get here.
The question I have is that I think historically we have taken what staff gives us and says, here's how we've come up with this, and it's probably a little bit of a pejorative term, probably stronger than I intend, but we end up rubber stamping a lot of stuff that staff does. And I don't say that to suggest that staff's not doing a good job, but I say that to suggest that maybe we don't really fully grasp the ramifications of what we do. And so I guess what I'm looking for is something even a little deeper than simply understanding what they did. I'm looking for a comprehension of why we should ask them to do what they're doing. And,
Well-
for example, we talk about we need to look for new sources of revenue. I've heard that kind of a comment from time to time when it deals with, where's the revenue coming from? Like I mentioned earlier today, public revenue, with the possible exception of enterprise funds, is always taken. It's never earned. We're not like private enterprises. We're taking it from somebody, and we need to have accountability for how we spend, but we also need accountability for how we take. And we just need to look at why we're taking, for what purposes, and look at that and really chew it out.
Well, one thing that might be interesting for you, Mary, is when I first got here, the League of Oregon Cities puts on all these classes they do. One of those is budgeting. And I took it so I could work on Oregon budgeting, because there's a lot of changes down from other places. And it was a really good class, would do a lot of what you're talking about. They go through a lot of this budgeting items. I think it was 4 hours or something one day. And I don't know how much it cost. It was $100 or something like that.
For example, you take a city function like, water and sewer and streets. Streets, water, and sewer are pretty essential to what we do. They're really not negotiable. You go up to another thing, a budget thing that we do here that's highly important. Something like, I'll take library or parks, something like that. Very important, less essential than sewers and streets. Now, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of the parks or the libraries at all. I'm not saying that in any way. I'm saying maybe we need to look at what we spend and why, and just maybe categorize it and say, okay, somewhere we have to draw a line as to what we're going to do and not do. And if we maybe just see it.
I would say, well, it's hard to tell whether what you're talking about is budgeting as opposed to prioritizing, which would be at a goal setting.
And that becomes your vision setting, and yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It boils into if we never look at it and we start with some assumptions on our budgeting without challenging them, then it really is our budgeting.
Well, yeah, I agree, because I was going to suggest, I mean, League of Oregon Cities has a lot of great things, and I think it would behoove us to find that and offer it to maybe any member of the Budget Committee, or find the person who teaches that and have them come to here to do.
We can call and check and see what they would cost to come in and do a class for this group.
Right, because that's different than, the comprehension of a budget and really understanding it is different than the prioritizing of which is more important. So those are two separate, I don't think we want to take our budget committee and ask them, would well, they are kind of prioritizing where we're going to send our money. But we set the basic direction and the basic goals of this body, and we prioritize those.
Priorities when we do that.
But one thing
I'd like to work on that.
I am an instructor through the Oregon Local Leadership Institute, and they do on-site classes. And they could probably cut you a very nice deal, and this would be a very good situation. Instead of you having to go to Salem or some other community, they can actually come here and service. And yes, it does take 4 or 5 hours, but believe me, that would probably be time well spent. A lot of questions, and the instructors are really good.
I don't know whether the other counselors remember, or I'm thinking of something else altogether, but sometime back, I think we requested from the city manager or the finance director, because the document is pretty difficult, and we were getting a one-sheet accounting of the general fund in our read file, as I recall. Anybody remember that?
I can tell you, yes, I gave out that, it was like every quarter I gave out a report or longer.
Quarterly, yes.
One of your city managers here says, I don't like that, let's work on a new one. So I was told to stop putting it out until we can rewrite a new one,
and Barry, to
it didn't go back to the top of the list of what he was looking for.
Because it is so complex, the total budget, but the general fund, I think we as a council should see those progressive numbers on, I don't care if it's monthly, but certainly quarterly, so that we can see revenue in, revenue out, and make good judgments based on some historical things that we've looked at.
So Wayne, just for your, one of my notes here is create a better report for the council. And I'll work on, I'll try to get it in the read file once a month, because I do put a treasury report in there, I think, pretty much every month now, but here's our investments. We can work on a report that we can stick in there once a month and say, here's a budget. Even if it's the one we're doing now, all I can do is push a button, it prints. But one of the two interims didn't like it, and so we got rid of it.
Well, and Gary may have some input
Yeah, and
in that direction.
Gary
He
may
have
say,
some experience of how to get that in a comprehensive manner to the council on a regular basis.
and that's why we've held the policies off. If they were on one of these council meetings, you're going to love it, because it's thicker than this pad of paper. There's about 25 policies. We're setting things down. A lot of them will take care of what we're talking about, putting reserves, lots of stuff. And Dana was about through reviewing them, his review, and then we're changing management. So I did talk to Gary yesterday and told him I have those. We're holding them for him. I'm going to hand them to him when he gets here for him to go through and review. And then we'll get him back in a council meeting. But I think that'll answer a lot of the questions as to how we do stuff, and sets down some of the things that are kind of arbitrary in writing on how we do things. So
Okay.
I think you'll like them when you see them.
Dean, was some of that, or what did you say, a percentage of those sheets are as a result of our last audit?
Actually, I was working on it before the audit. I've been working on these for over a year. And like I said, they go from risk management to cash handling to fund balance policies. There's a lot of different topics. So it was actually done before the auditors. They had some influence on some of the things that were changed. Some of the things were changed the way Dana kind of goes, I want this done this way, so we wrote some that way. Gary may say, I want it done the other way. So that's why I pulled it off the council meeting and said, we'll wait for the new city manager, have him review it, because he's the one that's got to be here to work with it. So.
You know, and that's why I mention a simplified general fund report to us, because even though there's policy, we're not totally familiar with the sheet of policies, but if we see a sheet of numbers related to general fund monthly, it keeps us in touch with revenue in, revenue out.
And I think the one you got before, it had the general fund broke down by department, but then it went through every single other fund was on there. One line, revenues, expenses, over, under.
I think
it hit every single fund we had. I think it was 4 pages long.
And I think
But
we
you're-
only got that one time,
No,
maybe twice.
I did it a couple of times. You know, John wanted it every quarter, and then we did it after that. And then, like I said, I believe it was Dana said he didn't like it, get rid of it. He wants to do something different, and it was one of those squirrels.
Okay.
So
Anything else from council? One thing, tonight is the Paul McQuiston event at the Elks. Do you know what time that starts, Jason?
I think it's
7?
6:30 or 7.
6:30? Okay, thank you. And then we have the event at the River Center that everybody's welcome, kids, families. It's open to the public, it's free, and that will start at 10:30 tomorrow. There'll be refreshments. We'll have his old middle school coach there, his old high school coach will be there. I shouldn't say old, former. And their families will be there, so it should be a fun time. Hope everybody can make it. What's that?
and a great band.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The band's going to be playing. Very good.
My son plays.
Anything else? Okay, one last opportunity for anybody from the public that would like to speak. Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting.